Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Um, just before we get started, we've got a little bit of a change to the panel. Unfortunately, Anna Fowley from SCVO isn't able to join us this morning, but has been more than ably replaced by Tracey Bird, who's the Governance and Information Officer with SCVO. So I'm personally very excited that we are actually getting to do this. This is something we've been talking about for a long time, and really the catalyst for getting everything in gear and getting us to this point was meeting Ellie Craig, who's one of our panelists this morning at the gathering at the start of the year. And it's kind of engaging young people in governance is something that comes up for us at Aspen all the time. And it's really important, I think, that we chat through what the challenges and issues are around it and why more young people aren't either stepping forward or the opportunities aren't there for them to get that access. So we've got kind of about an hour this morning, and I'm delighted to be joined by such an esteemed panel. And to get us started, I'm going to ask each of the panel just to kind of give their own thoughts and ideas around the subject, and how we can possibly engage more young people in governance. You'll see we've got a chat box, and I really love everyone to put any questions into that, and we'll come to those questions after the four panelists have given their kind of initial thoughts. So please keep those going, and I'll do my best to get to as many of those as I can afterwards. So Ellie, let's get started with you. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just taking us through your initial thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ellie, and in terms of sort of governance experience, I'm currently the chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament. I sit on the recently been appointed to sit on the UK board of the National Lottery Community Fund. I'm a member of the Young Scot board, and I've been on various different sort of youth advisory panels throughout my short career so far. So my initial thoughts, it will be no surprise that I'm a really big fan of engaging young people in governance structures, but there's a number of reasons for this. So the benefits of engaging young people is that, like other lived experience groups, they have so much valuable knowledge to share. I think there's a really big misconception that there's a lot of extra work that goes in to engaging young people and making these spaces inclusive, but in reality, making these structures more accessible for young people makes it more accessible for everybody. No one wants to read a 50-page document the night before a meeting. But when we put young people in this position, it creates an extra layer of barriers that many don't realise. So also before deciding on whether to have a young person in your governance structures, I think there's a number of considerations that an organisation needs to have. So for many organisations, in particular charities, where part of their central aim is to improve the lives of children and young people in some way, or their work affects children and young people in some way, I really believe that it needs to be embedded across the organisation. I think the first step can just be to sort of stick a young person on the board and or an advisory panel and then call that meaningful participation. Well, that's an important step or it should can be an important part of engaging young people within governance. It's definitely not the be all and end all. The real power for me within participation comes from addressing those power imbalances. There needs to be clear communication on what decisions are truly being made by young people and where it's just opinion given. And that's why when you have a young person on the board with voting rights the same as every other board member, that's why it's always cited as such a good example because it's really directly addressing that power imbalance and it's like leveling the playing field there. I also think there's one consideration which needs to we may get into later is that we shouldn't ask young people to speak on behalf of all young people. So young people from 16 to 30 or whatever age group you're defining it by is not one homogenous group. We do have insights because of age which would be helpful, but we can't just take one opinion of young people and call it a day. And so my final point before Passover would be one that I think is quite overlooked, especially from maybe looking at more of the business side of it and people who might be a little bit more skeptical to having a young person on their board. I really believe that having young people on boards supports the strategic development of young people. So I've been on management boards and have sort of knowledge and grounding in governance and finance before I've even finished my degree. And that's going to be a benefit to my skill set and what I could potentially bring to different employers once I sort of graduate. And I really think that that's something that gets overlooked. I don't know who we're going to go to next, Debbie, but I'll pass back to you.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. Just before I pass on, what made you kind of get interested in joining boards? Obviously, there's lots of benefits, and I'm sure writing your dissertation and doing that stuff at uni is definitely one of them. But what was kind of got you kind of over the line? Think actually this would be a great thing for me to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I didn't know anything about. And actually, I entered it through the Scottish Youth Parliament. So our entire board of eight is under 25, and it's within our governance structure as a membership-led organisation that it's made up of our members. And so it's something that I saw other people do when I joined the organisation 6 years ago, and I watched other people become a trustee and be vice chair and chair. And then I realised that actually at a young age it's possible to do. And then having that experience and then joining the Young Scot Board off the back of that, I think being in different boardrooms and being in these different groups and actually seeing that these spaces can be made accessible. And I think I maybe come at it from a slightly different angle because my first board experience was a board of all young people, which is definitely not the normal. It's meant that I guess my expectations are a little bit higher from what I expect from organisations looking to have a young person on their board.
There's nothing wrong with having high expectations, Ellie. I think that's quite important. Okay, lovely. Thanks so much for that. Tracy, let's come to you next.
You. Hi. As Debbie said, I'm not Anna Fowler. My name's Tracey Bird, and I run the SCVO Information Service and our trustee network as well. I helped write the Third Sector Governance Code and our Good Governance Checkup, and I'm also on a board myself of a local women's aid. So why have young people on a board? Well, it's good governance, diversity of thought and perspectives. It's not a nice to have. I think, if you want a high performing board, you need to have that diversity on it. Young trustees, they can make the decision making process, as Ellie said, more considered and represent perspectives that maybe you're not otherwise going to get. And they may be more representative of your local community or the community that you serve. Young people can identify new ways of working. I'm sure we've all heard the male pale and stale, which I don't like that expression, but you're going to get young people in. I don't want to stereotype, but young trustees, they've been raised in an increasingly digitized world. So they're going to offer insights into emerging trends and maybe some innovative solutions in terms of your fundraising, how you deliver your programs, how you reach out to stakeholders. They'll also hopefully increase your networking opportunities for your organization and help with succession planning. Trustee recruitment's difficult. Most boards find it very difficult to get trustees of any shape or form. So, if you open yourself up to another market as such, it's better for long-term sustainability. You might get that kind of support and commitment for years to come. And you're invested in future leaders, really, and developing that kind of pipeline. I'm not going to go on to barriers. I'll leave that for later and what you can do about barriers. And as Ellie said, for young trustees, what's in it for them? Well, I suppose they get professional development, a boost to their CV. They develop skills, that kind of softer skills about learning to deal with diverse people, develop team working and, shall I say, the art of diplomacy when you're on a board, and good communication skills. Yes, they'll learn about how to read financial statements and experience in strategic planning, and learning about governance in general and understanding how the sector works. And that can lead to both career opportunities and possible non-exec board roles as they progress through their career. So that would be my main takes for getting young trustees onto boards and what's in it for them as well. And I think we'll probably cover how we can get around barriers later, Debbie, are we? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thanks, Tracy. Something I think people forget about is succession planning on boards. And I do lots of board recruitment and work with a number of different boards and a number of different types of organisations. And quite often when we're going out to advert, we can get people who are really well established board members applying, and they've maybe got a few on the go and they've had lots of different roles, which is obviously great. You don't want to lose all of that experience and expertise. But I actually think people forget about when these people retire, and are not around, where's the next level of this, these really informed board experienced people coming from. And I think what you said there, Tracey's really right about, younger people are the future of boards, and it's about succession planning and giving them access and time to do that. So thank you, Tracey, that's great. And thanks for stepping in as well at short notice. Adam, let's move over to you.
Thanks, Debbie. And I was worried Tracey was setting a precedent where we all had to say we weren't Anna Fowley, because I believe there can only be one Anna Fowley. I must start with a confession to everyone, which is I have a slight piece of imposter syndrome here. I don't consider myself a young person. I'm 27 years old. Now, I realise that may seem a bit strange, but I probably am a young person. I probably am one of the youngest people in pretty much every room I go into. And it's interesting, the conversation we're having around what even is a young person. Is it under 25? Is it under 30? Is it under 35? Who knows? If I said to you, I've been working in governance for almost a decade, yet I'm only 27, that may seem quite strange. My first experience of governance was at the Independent Care Review. I was a co-chair of the Independent Care Review, which was very unusual. I was a young person who was given all of this power. I was also given a really wise piece of advice from Bruce Adamson, the Children's Commissioner, who said, grow a beard, people will stop asking you about your age. So that's why I have this. So it actually is interesting. I have a few thoughts on governance. I would, and I say this with the deepest respect to Tracey, I don't think young people are the future of boards. I think young people are the present and the past and the future. I was thinking about this today about, if someone in their 50s or 60s was on a board, what would they bring? And I was kind of stumped, because I thought, well, they probably know how to wire a plug. They probably remember stories about rationing. Whereas I know TikTok and how to convert a Word document to PDFs. So there is a kind of diverse skill set across all of society. And I think it's a challenge where we shouldn't divide them into young and old. Mainly because if you call me a young trustee, I'm going to call you an old trustee. And that seems to upset people. And I think that's a fair comparison to make. But I agree with all the points I think everyone's making. It's about a cross-section of society. I think Ellie's points are, as all of Ellie's points are, it's about culture and that power aspect. We can't get away from the fact that power dictates a lot of spaces in society. And if we start caveating who has power and why they should have power, that comes into some real challenges. But as I like to say, I think within governance, we shouldn't think about old people or young people or middle-aged people. We should think about old farts and young squeaks. And there are lots of old farts around, but we need less old farts. And I think that covers all of my post-it notes, which are just, I'm a bit riddled with ADHD, so they're kind of everywhere. I'm going to stop there, Debbie. I feel like I'm now drowning under the weight of my own thinking.
Not at all, not at all. I think we've all called people old farts, just maybe not to their face when we're going through these processes. So
You're missing out.
It's not a new term. But no, I think that's such an interesting point, and it's really difficult to not talk about someone as a young trustee when people don't quite understand that there's no real difference. So it's about having that kind of experience coming in, and I guess having people understand. But I kind of struggle with saying young trustee, because you're just a trustee. It doesn't, I didn't call, like, we don't call people old trustees or whatever. And like you say, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't like that either. So actually it means the same thing, and I think it's a very valid point, Adam. So thank you. Sean, we'll move over to you next.
Thanks, Debbie. And Adam, I loved your perspective there. I'm certainly an old fart. I can concur with that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sean Duffy. I'm currently the chair of the Donaldson Trust, trustee at St Andrews Links, and the CEO of the Wise Group. I think this is a point that we can no longer afford to ignore. If you look at why it matters, Oscar's Good Governance Code states very clearly that effective boards are diverse in skill, backgrounds and perspectives. But right now, the majority of our boards in Scotland don't reflect that. They reflect the past, not the future. I think, to Adam's point, and that's a governance risk that we really need to address head on. If you look at the data snapshot in Scotland, the average age of the Scottish third sector trustee is 57 years old. 2/3 are over 50. Meanwhile, 18 to 24-year-olds make up 12% of their population, but 1% of our trustees. Just let that sink in. We talk about diversity, but we're missing a whole generation of thinkers, doers, and leaders. And that's not just a missed opportunity. It's really a failure to meet also Oscar's expectations for inclusive governance. So what's at stake? The code of expectations, Oscar's good governance code, sets a clear expectations. Trustees must ensure that their boards have the right skills and experience to govern effectively. But for boards are made up of entirely people aged 50 plus like me, what kind of experience are you really bringing in? Blind spots, digital strategy, social media, emerging social issues, areas where younger trustees add invaluable insight. Strategic drift, boards risk making decisions based on heritage thinking and heritage experience, missing opportunities for innovation, challenging perspectives and change. The succession gaps that the guys have already talked about. Without a pipeline of younger trustees, we face knowledge gaps, governance instability, and when long-standing members step down. Policy context. Look at the National Performance Framework for the Scottish Government. It calls for a fairer Scotland. But how's it fair if young people aren't at the table when decisions have been made? Aren't adding their insight and knowledge to that when strategies have been formulated? If we're not including them, we're not just missing their voices, we're missing their intellect, their creativity, their perspective that helps solutions to be impactful going forward, not just based on what happened in the past. The ethical standards in public life. There's another point. Integrity, openness and respect. They're not just words, they're principles. So how could we say that we're being open and inclusive if we're not actively seeking the input of young people who are the most effective and can be the most impactful in the decisions we're making? So beyond the numbers, this isn't just about quotas, it's not about ticking boxes, it's about enhancing our governance quality. Because I actually think there's a huge element of that. It's about enhancing our governance quality, right? The digital savvy part of it. It's sometimes a throwaway statement by older trustees, "Oh, I'm not digitally savvy." It's almost pejorative, that phrase, because young trustees don't just understand tech; they live it. They live it, and they see digital risks and opportunities. I don't see them. The people I'm surrounded with most days don't see them. Lived and relatable experience. I think the relatable part is hugely important here, and in tandem with lived experience. Because you bring first-hand insight of today's pressing issues. And I know that we've got three boys who are in their 20s, and they're effectively market research. I know more about the world through them than I do through my own eyes. Student debt, unemployment, inequality, housing, education, the gig economy. The list can go on. Things that I think I've got a knowledge of. I've got a mile wide and inch deep knowledge of it. And these are issues that boards really need to understand, truly need to understand. So we need challenge and change, not conformity and comfort when it comes to this. My kids are always, that's the same question. Why? It drives me nuts, but it's the best question we have. Why? Why are we doing this? Why do we do it like that? I don't hear that around the boards that I'm on often enough. Why? Right? Practical steps. And I'm going to just talk, I know we'll come on to them, but, audit the board. We should audit our own boards. Audit our boards of Scotland. Actually see what the true reflection of it is. What's the age distribution? How many trustees are under 30? How well does the board reflect the diversity of the communities that they actually serve? Identify the gaps, not just in skills, but in perspectives, networks, and lived experience. Set targets. Oscar expects boards to actively address gaps in representation. Set a target. One trustee, young trustee in the next 12 months. Make it a strategic appointment, not a tokenistic one. Has to be a strategic appointment. Assign real areas of responsibility. Digital communications, community outreach. Rethink recruitment. If we want young people to apply, we need to change how we talk about trusteeship. Instead of governance, talk about leadership. Instead of financial oversight, talk about shaping strategy and decision making. Instead of monthly meetings, talk about solving real problems for real people. Create pathways. Develop board readiness programs. If we're serious about diversity, we need to also eliminate the financial and logistical challenges. Pay for travel and childcare. Look at stipends for younger people. Take away the burden and heaviness that the perception of board appointments carry, the liabilities of a trustee. The first thing you hear when you join a board is what your liabilities are. What happens to you if things go wrong? And that's very, very true. Schedule meetings at accessible times. Evenings, weekends, hybrid options. Also recognise that I'm at the other end of my career. But if you're wanting trustees who are at the beginning of their career, you need to make it workable for them and practical in a way that they can engage with it within their life, and it's not a trade-off. So it's clear. It's time to move the dial on this. We want to be relevant, impactful, and innovative. We need to really move on and prove it. Thank you.
Brilliant, John. Thanks very much. So that kind of brings me, how do we move the dial on it? How do we, I think someone mentioned barriers earlier, and I think it'd be really interesting to maybe just start off the chat about, there's two sides. I think what's holding young people back from getting on boards, but what is actually stopping organisations kind of make all these changes that we all know are really good changes, and what can we do to hopefully push that along a little bit? Who wants to take that first? Ellie?
Yeah, I can go first. I think in terms of what's holding young people back, I think there is a really lack of accessible information on what a trustee actually is. I think if you ask the average 16 to 30-year-old what a charity trustee is, they'd probably have not much of a clue, because it does kind of seem like this stereotype that boardrooms are kind of hidden away in a dark room somewhere. When I think of like the traditional boardroom, it's just sort of a bunch of old white men in suits, like in a dark, I don't know why it's always dark, maybe because it's not accessible. And actually, we need to look, I think, really building on what Sean was saying there, we really need to look at the routes and the pathways which exist to get young trustees into an organisation. That's sort of looking at recruitment systems. Is it anonymous recruitment for trustees? Are you going to reserve a place on your board for a young trustee? And it's a lot of people do it that way. Looking at the networks of young people which exist. So there's the Young Trustees movement, but also networks within your own organisation. So a lot of organisations who have young people on their boards also have other youth involvement in other ways. And so how do you support young people engaging with your organisation, maybe operationally, to actually then take a step up to the strategic level? And in terms of what holds people back, I think it's or older people back, including young people on their boards. I guess that's something I don't have much expertise. I can take a guess, but thankfully, a lot of the organisations which I've come across have been really inclusive of young people on boards, and hence why I have quite a few board positions. And I think that I do think what I said in my opening is true, that people think it's a lot more work than it actually is. And even if it was a lot of work, they should do it anyway for all the reasons that we've already said. But I do think there's a lot of misconceptions there. So that would be my insights.
Yeah, and I think there's something about joining the right board for you, because it needs to be something you're at least interested in, or you have some sort of connection with, to make you want to read those board papers. And that's at any age group. I mean, that's true for older people like me and other people out there. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday who said their board papers were 186 pages, which I just thought, I mean, some of the boards I've been on have been like, but that's the most I've heard for a long time, which I'm not sure anyone's going to read that word for word, in all honesty. And the amount of time it takes for someone to put that together as well on the other side is huge. But yeah, I mean, that's just one very small example. Adam, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think there's I think it built on Sean's point, actually. He talked about heritage problems, and there's almost something within here about heritage structures and heritage approaches. I really like that. I think I agree with Ellie when I think of boards and governance as being in, I don't know, dark rooms full of smoke, despite lighting having existed for like 150 years and smoking indoors having been banned for like 20. But there is something in this around what are the structures that we're putting in place. And Sean did say some of them around hybrid working. I think there are some other sort of, I think what keeps a lot of organisations back, and I probably should have said this at the start, was, so I run a charity that's solely about trying to help organisations listen to care experienced people. And the main thing that stops people listening is they don't feel confident in listening properly. There's a worry, there's a fear that, oh, if I do this and I get this wrong, I'm gonna get it wrong. And I actually think that there is a lot of goodwill on wanting to include anyone in a governance structure that you're not listening to. But the main thing that stops power sharing is that people are just kind of panicked about it because they don't want to do it wrong. And then that paralysis prevents them. I think there's also around how you, a lot of people are on boards because they care about the topic. So it's actually really hard for them to extrapolate that and say, why would someone else be involved in this? I'm involved in this because, you know, it's just inherently something I enjoy. And I think that also being able to convey that information is, so I think there's lots of issues that maybe stop organizations, but I don't think any of them are from not wanting to, but I would say it's probably not knowing how to, or not feeling confident that they do have the skills to, or if we're talking about participation, it's usually held by one member of staff. And then that member of staff's then responsible for trying to improve your entire governance structure. And that's a different challenge.
Thanks, Adam. Tracey or Sean, did you want to add anything on there?
I was just looking at Sarah's comment there about having the culture and spaces for young people to get involved. And I think there's a lot more we could be doing in schools, colleges, universities, just to explain about our sector, what it does, how you can get involved. And there's a real pipeline there in universities getting people. I know Napier University did a lot of work around this. I don't know whether they still do it, but but obviously you need the funding, you need a proper project to get that going. I would take it back to basics as well. Technically, you should have fixed terms for trustees in your constitution so that you can get new blood in and out. People stay on boards for far too long. And then once you've got that, I think get that open and transparent recruitment process. There's too many tapping on the shoulder. You know, will you join the board? And I get that. It's really hard to get people. But if you're not advertising widely, you're just going to get more of the same. So think about going into those spaces where younger people are. And think about the language you use in your ads. Use plain English. You know, a lot of young people don't know what a trustee is, but they might be fantastic for the role. They might want to join to help you with your mission. Their values might align. So it's about that values as much as it is about skills. So explain exactly what a trustee is and what they will do within your charity. And limit your must-haves. I see too many recruitment ads. Must have 5 years experience in this. Must have an HR background. A lot of this stuff you can buy in on a board. You don't need necessarily your trustees to have that. You just need that commitment. And as I say, alignment with your values. Those kind of specifications, I think, can be really off-putting for people. And design a good role description. It's not vital that people have been a trustee before. You know, how do you get that start otherwise? They can learn. There's loads of free training out there for learning about your legal roles and responsibilities. You know, somebody can help a young trustee read a financial report if they've not come across that before. They can learn all of that. You know, they don't need to have that going in. And streamline your application process, I would say. Sometimes it's too long. Endless forms that you have to fill in. People's time's precious, but obviously from the outset, make them fully aware of the commitment and time required. Make your interviews inclusive. I'm interviewing at the moment. We've got spaces for 5 people on our board. So maybe think about giving the questions beforehand so people can really think about it. Give people plenty notice and offer them flexible times and time to prepare. And then also make your interview panel really diverse as well, because everybody has preconceptions. And what we've done is we've got people that are interested in being on the board. We like them, they like us, but they're coming along to see how board meetings work. They're maybe going to do a couple of board meetings where they don't have any voting rights, but before they commit to see whether it is really for them. You mentioned 180-page board papers. I think that's horrendous. But take the jargon out, take the acronyms out of your board papers. I mean, that applies to anybody really. And I think Sean mentioned about having remote hybrid meetings, and make sure that, you know, we've always had them on a Wednesday night bi-monthly. Think about changing them up and around. Not everybody can do that. If you're further on in your career, maybe you can take time out of your day. Not if you're starting off, not if you do shift work, that kind of thing. So just consider that. And then once you've got them on, I would say get really good support. Obviously, your beat meetings should be chaired well, but think about giving them a mentor or maybe appointing a couple of new trustees so they're not the only one. It's not tokenistic. And make that kind of board culture where you can challenge, where you can ask questions. I think that's really important, where they'll get support between the board meetings if they want to ask questions about the papers. So I think if you're going to do it, just commit and make sure they get a really good induction and they get ongoing support. And as I say, that applies for any trustee, not just young trustees. But I think I do the good governance checkup, and a lot of the results from that have shown that so many trustees don't get an induction. And you think if you start a job and you don't get any induction, you're just straight in there from day one. I don't think you would particularly want to stay in that job. So invest in your people if you're going to take all that time trying to find them. That was my big list.
Thanks, Tracey. There's a couple of comments coming in, some really interesting stuff. And one's coming in from David Chalmers, who's obviously saying rightly a lot of charities are finding it to attract trustees overall. So, you know, where can boards access this kind of pool of younger people? Because like it's obviously not out there as much. So what can the board do to find people, you know, that might come from a bit of a younger background? What are your thoughts around that?
I'll quickly jump in first. I've got a really quick answer, which is network with younger people. Actually, I think people say, "Oh, can't get young people because we're not on TikTok, we're not on this." Probably most of my LinkedIn connections are all young people who have similar experiences to me, who have been involved in decision-making processes at different levels. And so actually, these young people exist. They just don't see your opportunities because they're not in newsletters, they're not on websites, they're not following you on LinkedIn. And actually, a way to get around that is to get young people who are already engaged in governance, and there's actually a really big network across the UK and across Scotland, and get them to share the opportunities within their networks. Like, it's classic networking, but I guess it's about seeing the value of having a range of people within your networks and who are sharing your ads as well, and not just aiming to get sort of really senior management people who you know have great connections with other senior management people to share your posts.
Yeah, I think when people start saying TikTok's the only way of contacting anyone under 30, it really starts to annoy me because that really can't be the only way people communicate. Sorry, Adam, were you going to come in there?
Yeah, no, I think that this probably follows on from Ellie's point, which is the type of people who are going to sit on boards are the same regardless of their sort of age demographic. They're going to be people who are more switched on to wanting to be in those spaces. So this idea that we were aiming for someone with absolutely no experience or understanding of a charity or third sector probably isn't going to be the case. But there's a step before that where you have these really switched on, motivated, you know, organisers. The great thing I see about young people is that we're very angry and we're very loud and we're very organised. And social media has given us the ability to be very angry and very loud and very mobilised, more so than I think maybe previous generations. So there is a sort of group of people who are ready to make a change and difference in society. I think it's maybe just assuming where they are. I think LinkedIn's a good one. There is also then that slope. How do you get people up to that point? And I would say using social media is a good tool, but also not taking yourselves too seriously. If a young person, and there's lots of research in this around branding and marketing, if a young person feels like you're trying to sell to them, they switch off. Because our ability to skip ads has never been easier. You know, we have a skip ad button, whereas maybe 30, 40 years ago, you had to sit through all the adverts. So there's something about how you create a kind of personal connection between your organization and the young people you want to sit on that board. And it probably starts with people who are very active and motivated young people. But don't be afraid to try social medias that are more fun. You know, so Instagram, we use Instagram a lot, to just be silly and fun. Because I think if people see me being silly and fun, they'll want to be part of an organization that I think is silly and fun, but doing important stuff. So there's two groups there. You're targeting all young people in general, but right now you're probably targeting people who are already motivated.
Thanks, Adam. Sean, were you wanting to come in there?
Yeah, I think there's a massive cultural problem and the perception around about that. The fact of the matter is, young people are busy building careers and lives, and this has to fit with it, right? And also there's a hierarchical view of what a board is. The board sits at the top of an organisation, and that's a cultural deferential piece of it. You work your way towards that. It's the end of a journey within your career. Boards are not at the start of a journey. They're at the end of the journey. And actually, societally, we're conditioned to think that. It's at the other end of your career spectrum. You've got to go through all these hoops and loops before you get to that. It's quite interesting. I was reading some research on this, and the awareness within the 18 to 24-year-old demographic of what a trustee is very, very low. Even the word trustee, what does it mean? Like, when you go and look at it, when the question was asked, what do you think of when you were asked what does a trustee mean? It's about giving out money, about managing money and giving out money. Right? And if you think about the governance code and things like that around about it, it's about good governance, control. I mean, even the word governance is a scary word. For some, governance is control. There's a legitimacy to it. There's an efficacy to it. It isn't light-hearted and, it's scary. It's all about liabilities and all. There's a heaviness to it. To Ellie's point, if we want to find young people, go where they are. Don't expect them to come and look for us and all our gang. Go where they are. If you want to be young, surround yourself with young people. If you want to think young, surround yourself with young people. If you don't. So I think there's a huge cultural piece in this. Also, I think from organisations' perspectives, and I put myself in this too, we've got to have courage. Because, Tracey will be able to speak to this more eloquently than I will. Well, I can, but if you go and look round, there's still lots of organisations have missteps with the most experienced people on their board. And that arguably, if they had different types of experience on the board, they wouldn't have the same missteps. So there's a courage piece to this. And there's a courage piece on both sides. Because actually one of the great routes to joining a third sector board is volunteering. And volunteering in organisations and surrounding yourself with people who have an awareness of what this is about, what opportunities are available. Because most people find their route into this by meeting people who have got similar activities or experiences within that sector or within that activity. So I mean, I think for me is courage, and also, frankly, it looks dull. It just looks dull. Right? Ellie and Adam mentioned it. You can close your eyes, you can picture a mahogany room with a big table and leather chairs and people with bad fitting suits talking about things that nobody else really cares about. It needs an overhaul. It needs a rebrand. What is it? What is it truly? Not what people think it is, but what is it really and truly? And I think with that, culture and courage are two of the big things for me.
Okay, great, thanks. There's been quite... Oh, Adam, come on in.
Yeah, can I just come in on the back of Sean's point there, which I think is what I would describe as the hoodie revolution, where we've kind of discovered semi-formal wear in organisations who want to appear more younger, and I think that's great. But I have way too many branded hoodies, so it becomes an issue where I did like Sean's point that I'm fully happy to admit in a public forum that I am a bit of a psychopath for having been on so many boards in so little time. But yeah, I think that think if you're in a space and wearing a hoodie, how would that change the dynamic to wearing a suit? Although, and I must say this, a mahogany room with a big table, with like a nice whiskey there, Sean, I think I'd be quite happy, So there's kind of a trade-off. You can have both spaces.
Okay, I think I'm going to get some Aspen branded hoodies and we'll start that from this side as well. There's quite a lot of chatting here about young people obviously starting careers or having families and all that kind of stuff. And someone's mentioned, how do we encourage employers to give people time to go and get involved in this stuff, which is actually quite massive. Because if something, I mean, a lot of the boards I've been on, I've met at night time, and you're like, that's okay unless you've got responsibilities at home or you're doing a different shift pattern or something. So how do we get in and kind of maybe from the other side talk to employers where these people might be working to kind of help them kind of realise that actually there's a massive benefit in giving people a bit of time off even to go and do something like this? Is that something anyone's got any experience of?
Can I just come in quickly on that? It's
Yeah.
build volunteering days into your employment contracts. And that's what it is, build volunteering days in. So, and actually if you look at even just philanthropically from a Scotland perspective, one of the greatest things we can give philanthropically in Scotland is time, as well as money. Everyone thinks money is time. And within the organisation I'm the CEO, we've started that by, over and above your holiday entitlement, every colleague has three volunteering days. And I want us to go further than that. And if someone came to us and said, actually, I want to join a board, and it means that I need to do it during the day, then we would adjust that to make sure that they didn't have to take holidays and they weren't under pressure to do it within their working complement. So build volunteering days in. That's the biggest and simplest way to do that.
Yep, I think that's really important. It's something we've done at Aspen as well, and I know a lot of organisations do it. But what I've seen happen in some places is that the people don't feel they can take the time off, or feel, it's kind of, okay, I've got these days, but if I take a half day here, we're really busy, and that's going to impact on something else. So I think it's about having those days, but also making it part of the culture of that organisation, that it's actually good. We want to encourage it and to be in kind of something that I don't think maybe gets spoken about enough.
But also, I think, Debbie, it's about an education piece about trusteeship is volunteering. A lot of people think volunteering is working in the charity shop or, a food delivery, whatever. And I think a lot of people don't think being a trustee is volunteering. They are.
Just on that point, Tracey, I think that comes back to the cultural piece that Debbie talked about. The absence of money in the transaction doesn't make it less valuable. And that's a huge point. That's the cultural element that we've got here. You see it in the voluntary sector, the third sector in Scotland. It has a slightly diminished view within the overall kind of value chain. Or you work in the third sector. Well, that's slightly less important and impactful and professional than the private sector.
Than the first or the second sector.
Or the first or the second sector. There's a huge cultural element to this. And also, when we talked about auditing it, if you go back to the volunteering bit that we mentioned earlier on, organisations publishing how many volunteering days were actually used in your organisation, as opposed to how many did you offer, how many did you use. You should be actively encouraging people to use them, not just making them available. Sorry, Ellie.
No, it's so interesting. This is kind of the other side of the coin point I was thinking of, which was, how do we, of course, employers have to support young people and anyone to volunteer and to sort of join boards. But actually, I think something that's overlooked is what incentivizes young people to join boards is not what incentivizes older people to join boards. And I mean, we're all individuals, but I think being at the start of your career, you want those opportunities to network, to meet people, to get a deeper understanding of different sectors and areas that you're interested in. I mean, like really simple ones, I think the incentives for young people can be things that I'm really like that old trustees phrase, I'm going to keep using it, old trustees take for granted, which is, a seat in an awards ceremony, being an ambassador in certain ways, getting to meet people, getting training days, there's so much opportunity, which honestly does not cost any money to, and it's so overlooked, but actually that's what drives me to join boards is looking at those opportunities to really be an ambassador for organisations and really get embedded within the work.
Okay, no, I think that all makes sense. We've got loads of really great comments and stuff coming out now. Lots of people talking about how many volunteer days they offer and all of that stuff, which is great. But I guess maybe the people that don't offer those kind of opportunities maybe aren't on the call. It's maybe we need to go into a different way to get them. Sean?
Just something actually just to follow up on Ellie, and I'm sure, hopefully Tracey will concur with us. One of the things that really, really upsets me is when people join a board because they want to give back. That's what they say. Give back. Even the implication of that phrase means you have to have accrued something to give it back. So therefore, that's at the other end of a career spectrum. We are perpetuating this culturally. Everything that we say and do around about boards perpetuates you have to be older to serve. And actually, there's another thing about how many boards is too many.
Yeah.
I'm on 3, and I think I'm right at the very top end of what my time commitment could be, emotionally and otherwise. But I'm sure that we all know, might be slightly controversial with a small c, but we all know people who collect boards because it looks good on their LinkedIn profile, or it looks good on their CV. They collect boards. And actually, if you think about the real reason you join a board is to give, not to get.
Yeah.
You will get as a part of giving, but that shouldn't be your first objective.
I think the amount of boards you're on is interesting. I went through quite a period of being on 3 boards at the one time. And then once I'd come off a couple, said I'd only ever be on 1 board at a time going forward. So I could have, and I've done that with this board role. And I think I get so much more from it, just being able to immerse myself in that one kind of extra activity. So whether it lasts or not, I don't know, but it's definitely worked out for me. Adam, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I think there's kind of 2 things within this that are really, really interesting. And Sean, I have to wonder whether you have some kind of spy camera on me, because everything I'm writing down, you're then saying before me, and I have to admit it's rather frustrating. But no, there is something about giving and getting. But then also, I guess to go back to Ellie's point, young people have to get something, and so the kind of offer has to be sort of has to lay out. I also would like to go back to a different point, which is not all boards are created equally. I sit on 2 very, very different boards. I sit on the Young Scot board, and I sit as a commissioner on the Scottish Commission on Social Security. 2 fundamentally different ways of operating, 2 different styles. One of them I have more of an executive function and a governance function. So it's about what skill set can fit in. And you could realistically have a 21, 22-year-old qualified accountant. That is fully within the age range. So yeah, I think it's kind of laying up what fits where. And if there's wine and cheese, I'm probably going to be there.
Yeah, I hear you. Yep. Ellie?
Yeah, I'm conscious of time. I was picking up on a few things in the chat that got me really quite excited. If that's okay, Debbie.
Sure.
There's loads of stuff around if we can't get a young person on the board, how else can we engage young people, and that there needs to be a culture shift and sort of how to create this stuff. And I really think it links to the work that's been done in Scotland over the past decade to incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into law. And so specifically Article 12 of the UNCRC, which is young people's right to be heard and listened to. And really, if we're embedding meaningful participation in that sense across a whole child's life, then the natural progression isn't just to join a board, but is to feel confident and not have imposter syndrome that you are actually an active citizen and contributor to sort of civic life. And I really think that the culture of how we moved in Scotland to respect children and young people's rights, there's so much learning there that we can take into this space. If we look at sort of what makes participation meaningful, which my answer to the what could we do if it's not a board is it doesn't really matter what form it comes in, as long as it's meaningful. And a lot of, in my work, we use a lot of the Lundy model of participation, which is Professor Laura Lundy. It's all about space, voice, audience, and influence, and the different steps that have to be taken to make a space accessible. And actually, I think that's the perfect example of what you do to create meaningful participation for young people, even up to the age of 30, or adults, because it's really just about creating an accessible and inclusive space and handing back power to those with lived experience. And I think another thing is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, there's loads of models and examples out there of youth participation in advisory groups that have been done really well. I'm sure I know there's a lot of models that have not been done very well. So we'll maybe avoid those ones. But actually connecting with organisations who work with young people and who are experts in this stuff. You know, if you are, I'm just going to pick like a climate charity, but you've not done any work with young people, I can almost guarantee that there's probably about 10 or 20 or more across the UK who are a climate charity and have done work with young people. So use your networks and connections, and it doesn't have to be difficult unless you make it difficult.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm just conscious of time. There's so much really cool stuff coming up in here, and maybe actually we need to have another session on this in another month or two. And there's something really interesting here for me about young people having confidence and people from different privileges having more access to these type of things. So, you know, how do we access people from non-privileged areas and those kind of backgrounds to come in to boards? But I don't think we've got time to necessarily chat through that right now. That's a bad question to end on. So I think what we'll do, just to kind of finish up, is I'd like to come to each of you and just ask, what's the one thing that you want to happen now, like after this, that any organisation or any person, whatever way you want to look at it, can do to let's move this forward a bit and get more people to join boards. Tracey, I'll come to you first.
One thing.
Yeah, the first thing you think can happen.
Have open and transparent recruitment and really think about where you're advertising and what you're advertising. And then you're going to get diversity in all shapes and sizes, I would say.
Thanks, Tracey. Adam? Oh,
I lost the mute button there.
There we go.
I'm going to quote Yoda, which is do or do not. There is no try. You're in this space and you're asking the right questions. You're on the right journey. Have faith.
I wish we'd ended on you, because why would you not end on Yoda if you had the chance? Sean, you next.
Have courage. Genuinely have courage. And do you know what? And I'm actually thinking about some of the stuff that I've got coming up. Go and find young people and get them to go and advertise for young people to come and join the organisation. Don't try and speak the language you can't speak. Go and get people who can do that and know where to find it. And give away control. Be courageous and give away control.
Ellie, fight over to you for the last one.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said, but also I think I'd just finish on the fact that the work that goes into creating accessible space, not just for young people, but for everybody, is outweighed massively by the positives and benefits that we've just talked through that exist for having a young person on your board. And I actually think you can plan and plan and plan, but actually I think, as everybody else has said, is just do it and actually be open and honest and evaluate these processes and regularly check in with the young people that you engage with in your governance structures, because in my experience, young people, if you create the right conditions, can be the most brutal in their feedback and evaluation, and so use that and listen to that.
Thank you so much to everyone on the panel and for everyone who's put comments and questions in. I'm really sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but an hour goes very quickly when you're having such an interesting chat. It is something I think we will definitely revisit in the next couple of months again, and take the chat on and hopefully put a little bit more pressure on to get some more younger people into board positions. So thanks very much for joining, everyone.